Hey everybody, welcome to today's YouTube and podcast interview with Bradlee Roffers. I came across Bradlee in an unexpected way on the recent Airheads conference that was an amazing event curated by the very fabulous Tom Granger and Mike Maher. On that talk, I was listening avidly to James Nestor. I'm a big fan. I love what he's written. I love his material. I loved his accessibility. Now, in that talk, he happened to mention this woman sitting with me right now within the context of, let's say, older women. I class myself in that context most definitely now. And my ears pricked up because we were talking about breathing. He was talking about breathing. He was talking about cold exposure. He was sharing lots of things. And I'm always fascinated by how older women relate to some of these practices. So, bing, I was like, I want to talk to this woman. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Bradlee, and I'm sure she'll tell you more in her own words. So, Bradlee is a world-traveling adventure seeker who is currently living in Austin, Texas, with her husband and two teenage daughters. She's inspired by the power of nature and human connection and is committed to helping people reconnect to their true selves and a sense of purpose. After spending 3 decades focused on building businesses, raising children, and staying committed in her marriage, Bradlee found herself completely disconnected from those identities or her identity and numb to the world around her. I'm sure many of you will relate. I'm going to leave it on this cliffhanging moment before I bring Bradlee in. Then, on one trip to Spain, her mind was blown right open. She connected to her heart and brought herself home again. Since then, she's kicked her corporate career into the curb and is now dedicated to helping people live conscious lives full of adventure, self awareness, human connection, and nature. This sounds amazing, Bradlee. And, I think well, first of all, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for to James for talking about a little bit about my journey. And Tom and Mike are dear friends that I met a year and a half ago on a Costa Rica breath retreat with James, and they're incredible humans. So I'm super excited that the world connected us all.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I've just remembered now because Tom, who I've been chatting with even before I got to know Mike, said to me, I think you and Bradlee have to meet. I think you'd get along. And like he
Yeah.
knows a little bit about my work and my humor and my story. And, bringing that in as part of that journey of exploration, excavation, and redefining, it's not always an easy ride. And certainly from reading about your story, I mean, tell us more about the woman you were and the life you were living and how and why that became untenable for you.
Yeah, it's a great and loaded question. I think about, we go through life on this path and we just, I think, have this narrative of how we think things should be. And I did all of those things. I went to college, I graduated, fell in love, I had a great career, I got married, I had two children, we bought a house, we had a dog. I did all of the things, right? And somewhere along the way, I gave up just little bits and pieces of myself. This is, I think, indicative of most adults, in particular women. I think, especially mothers. It's just, it's kind of just the nature's way, if you will. We are caregivers. And in doing so, we end up, I think, caring for those around us oftentimes more than we care for ourselves. And it wasn't that I was completely I was still taking care of myself, but I just felt disconnected. It's probably the best way to describe it. Used to say, 2.5 years ago, if you were to ask me if I was hungry, I don't even think I could have honestly told you if I was, because I was just walking around the world like eating and not tasting my food. And that's one analogy to describe a million different ways in which I was moving through the world. But I just was really not at all plugged in. And this was, I'm going to be 50 next week. So at about 46, I started to feel the change, right? Physically, I started to put on a little bit of weight every year. I started to not sleep so well. I lost my libido. Like things just were starting to become more distant. Things that I didn't have to work hard at. Suddenly I had to think about sleeping, right? Like work to fall asleep. And it was just
Mm.
it became aware. I just started to realize like something was off. And then you mix in, okay, you're middle-aged, you're perimenopausal, you have parents who are aging and sick and oftentimes dying. And then you have I have two teenage daughters who are going through puberty. Like, no wonder there's like all these middle-aged women with, a
Right.
recycling bin full of empty wine bottles, right? Like that was my coping mechanism, was to just pop open that bottle of wine at the end of the night. And that certainly was not serving me, right? It was just exacerbating all the things that I was not happy about. And so, yeah, really was starting to feel like I started to seek feeling better, because I was realizing for the first time in my life, I wasn't feeling good physically and mentally and emotionally.
Mm, mm. I want to just return a moment. You made a point there that I think is actually really resonant for a lot of people, where you'd already talked about the parts that you kind of sacrifice and give up in order to be a
Mhm.
mother, in order to go to work, hold down a job, hold down a family. So when you compound that then with these changes that are slowly eroding other parts that you've taken for granted in the past, maybe your fitness, your health, your appearance,
Mhm.
etc. That's a scary place for a lot of women to find themselves in, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think um, the hardest part for me in all of this, in this sort of season of life, is how I like to look at it, right? And this is this season that I'm in right now. And the hardest part for me has been, if I look back on last season, which was my daughters between the ages of like 5 and 12, that was like the romance season, right? They listened to you, they loved you unconditionally, they were sweet. You would buy them clothes and they would wear them. Like it was just this, beautiful, like they needed you, right? You could lie to them and they would not question you, right? And all of a sudden you wake up one day and you look at like this woman laying in my daughter's bed, and I'm like, who is this person? And they're like up and running. They're becoming they don't need you the same way. They need you in a very different way, but the need is very different. It's very independent. And I felt a huge sense of loss,
Yeah.
a loss of love there, that was really cathartic for me for a very long time. And I by no means have like raised my kids to be dependent on me. I've always like fiercely kind of made them figure out their own way. However, I really, really, really had to recognize that I was just like I got a lot of love and fulfillment from them from in that time of my life. And it's not that I don't anymore. I mean, I swear I mean I hit the lottery with my kids. They're incredible, emerging adults. Um, but it's different. And then you have more time, right? They are driving. They don't need your time the same way. And so I found myself having not as much love, more time, and and more financial freedom, because we're just that much older in life, right? We've saved and worked and so I have like money and time, which is dangerous, and not feeling loved, right? So those three things are just tricky, right? And they can spin out of control for a lot of people. So I really was committed to sort of trying to figure this out in a positive way.
Do you think that that figuring out was mitigated for some of those reasons that you were finding challenging, rather than it coming from here, as in, oh, here are these things, I've got money, I've got time,
Mhm.
I'm losing love. That could come from this logical analysis, assessment of one's life. We see all these books and journals and wheels of, or there's that lived experience of something's off here. I'm not
Yeah.
fulfilled. I don't like the way I'm feeling. I don't like the way I'm looking. Something is changing.
I think that all of those observations that I made at that time were all in my monkey mind. It was all of the world telling me all of these things. It was I've got, I don't know how many self-help books up on my shelf right here. It was the books I was reading, the podcasts I was listening to. It was the other women I was talking to. It was this narrative of like, yeah, well, no shit, Sherlock, this is what happens in life. And so I was just living this path again. And it wasn't until I ripped myself open in the mountains of Spain that I actually felt it. And I felt it in a way that was profound and beautiful. And the best way that I can describe it is I had a knowing within me and an awareness within me that I had never felt before in my entire life. And it struck a chord of curiosity that pivoted my journey in just a profound way.
It sounds to me like you weren't necessarily expecting that. So had you gone on this trip to the mountains in Spain just for something to do with your time and your money, or?
Yeah. So great question. I guess it was the end of the year 2020, and the new year was approaching, which New Year's is my favorite holiday because I feel like, well, first of all, the whole world celebrates it. So it's not limited to religion or location or country or nationality. Like everyone celebrates the new year, and everyone wakes up on New Year's Day, I think, with the best intention, just trying to be a little bit better in some way. And so I just think that the universe and the energy that is put out on the first of the year is just good mojo. Whether it lasts or not, doesn't matter. That first day, I just love it. And so I was sitting there thinking about what is it that I want in 2021. And I had decided that this year I would just pick one thing a month to try new that was health and wellness related, just to start trying and exploring different things. And I am not the type of person who does a lot of facials or massages or self-care. That was just not in my repertoire. So I thought, well, this will be a good way for me to, I don't know, try a hot stone massage. Never done that before. And one of the things on my list was to take a Wim Hof workshop. I had watched the Goop Netflix series.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated. I was absolutely fascinated by this process. That was definitely, anyway, so that sort of started it. So I just put that on my list of 12 things I was going to do in the year. And I Googled it, and turned out that there was a woman from Houston coming to Austin to do a retreat or a workshop, an afternoon workshop. And I signed up for it in February. So January rolls around. I don't know. I did my hot stone massage. It was great. And then the first week of February, I got into a terrible car accident with my younger daughter. I think she was probably 14 at the time. We were driving down the interstate, and we were stopped in traffic, and a F-250, which is a huge Texas pickup truck, hit us going 85 miles an hour. And it was a 4-car pileup, and my daughter was asleep in the back seat. And we both obviously survived, and I had some pretty significant injuries. She was okay. But the most terrifying moment for me was when the impact stopped and the airbag smoke stopped, and I looked in the rearview mirror. I didn't know what I was going to see, right? I had no idea if my daughter was dead or alive, or what I was about to see. And that trauma, I mean, it gives me goosebumps to just even tell the story to this day. And so I am in a cast, I'm a mess. I'm just trying to like make it through my February, like here's the new year, like off to a really crummy start. And the Wim Hof workshop was like a week later. And I called the woman, and I told her what happened. I said, look, I'm so sorry. I can't cold plunge. I have this huge cast. I'm in no headspace. She's like, no, you need to come. Bring a trash bag and some duct tape. Where you're going in the ice, you're coming. And I was like, all right, I'll go, right? I made this commitment. I paid for it. I'm going to go. So off I went, knowing nothing other than the Goop, the Goop Netflix that I watched. So I go, and I start breathing and listening and paying attention and taking this is like, incredible. Take all these notes, asking questions. I go, like, we start really getting into the breath work. And then I think around the 4th or 5th round, my whole body tightened, and I basically relived the trauma of the car accident. I could feel the seatbelt on my chest. I could feel the airbag on my face. I could smell the airbag. My whole arm, which was in a cast, was soaking wet with sweat.
Mm.
And I lay there in that retention, in that trauma. It wasn't painful. It wasn't scary. It was just present, right? It was just very much alive in my body.
Mm.
And on that release and on that exhale, I literally felt all of that presence shoot out my fingers and out my toes. It literally just left my body. And I sat up like, what just happened? And then I got into the ice, which that was easy for me. That's like, I don't know, that was just like, yeah, I'm in. I felt so good. I felt so light. I wrapped up that cast with a
Let's
trash
cast.
bag and duct tape, and I got with all these other people from all over Texas, and I drove home, and I felt so good. It was amazing. But I also had this deep sense of, I am never doing that again, because that was just a car accident. I got a lot of other shit that needs to probably come out of me. And it's a lot worse than a car accident.
Oh,
And
okay.
so it just, that was it. I
So it
never
came
went,
into your awareness what it was possible to bring up, and then you were contracting slightly from the nervousness around that.
yeah, because it was so intense and it was such a traumatic experience that I just thought, well, God, is every time I do this breath practice, am I going to relive my daddy issue or my, like, whatever, my boyfriend from whatever, all of the things that we bottle up inside. And so I just, yeah, I just never went back. And then my life, continued down this sort of crummy path. And I was gaining more and more weight and feeling crummier and crummier. And none of the spa treatments that I was doing were really helping. And I was sitting on the front porch with my husband the end of June. And I just said, I'm like, I need a retreat. I need a reset. I want to go somewhere. I need like a kick in my ass to just get back on track to who I am. And I was searching, I was looking, of course, I'm sure, Google was listening, because I kept on popping up, this bougie spa and this retreat and, yoga and all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to go to rehab. I don't want to go to a day or like a bougie spa for a week.
Yeah.
And like, I need to do the work. And I just didn't know what it was. And then sure enough, on Instagram, Wim Hof Spain expedition, 2 spots left. It was in like 10 days and I showed it to my husband on the front porch, and he's like, oh my God, you should do that. And I thought, wow, a week of Wim Hof, like I'm going to breathe all my shit out, right? Like this is going to just, there's no turning
You're
back.
like, I hope they're ready for me.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, this is what I should do. And he said, yeah, you probably should. I got up to go get another cup of coffee. I came back and my husband turned his phone around and he had a round trip first class ticket to Barcelona. He said, you better book that right now because I just got you a ticket.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Does he have any
Mm-hmm.
best friends?
He's like, I mean, my husband is definitely my biggest supporter and fan. He's incredible.
Mm.
And so that's what I did. Off I went on the 4th of July. I showed up at the Miami airport and I checked into
On the
my
4th of
flight, and
July.
on the 4th of July, and I literally started to have a panic attack. I'm like, what am I doing?
Mm.
What am I doing? I don't speak Spanish. I
Mm.
haven't used my passport and I don't know how long. Like it was COVID. I mean, it was just this crazy time in the world. And for anybody that's been on a Wim Hof expedition, their communication is like zero, which I think is, by the way, a part of their process. Is like they don't tell you a lot because the fear instinct is a part of the process, right? And so I had like fear was brewing inside of me. Like, what am I doing? Who am I meeting? I'm going by myself. I don't know where I'm headed. All the things. I got on the plane. I had some champagne. I was totally fine. Don't get me wrong. I get to Barcelona. I'm at the airport and I meet this, group of, I think there were just about 80 people. And we get in a bus and we go 3 or 4 hours into the mountains. And I started this week-long journey of being a kid again. I mean, behaving like an imbecile, rolling around in the mud, swimming naked in the lake, deep breathing, canyoning. I'd never done that before. Whitewater rafting, hiking, breathing, cold plunging with people from all over the world, men and women, mostly men, a few incredible women, mostly men,
Mm.
who were experiencing all different types of things around me, outside in nature, well fed. And what I realized was it wasn't traumatic for me. Once I actually leaned in and let go of what may come up, it was this total love fest. It was beautiful. It was just the best way I can describe it is like I came home to myself again. I fell in love with myself again. And it was this beautiful gift of profound awakening
Mm.
that this one type of breath work opened me up to.
Wow.
And then, yeah,
Mm.
it changed everything.
I mean, there's so many questions that I've got in there, Bradley. We were mentioning a bit before we came on about this masculine feminine ratio within
Mm,
healing and some of these retreats. So I want to come back to that. But actually, what I also want to say is because I teach conscious connected breathwork, which is open mouth breathwork, which obviously the people who work with functional breathing aren't big fans of typically. And
yep.
I understand why, and I think that's
Mhm,
a relevant part of it. But as I've always said, I stand by it because stories like that, and stories like my own, and stories that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of and privileged enough to witness, there's no way that 10 years of functional nose breathing would have got people to those places. So I always feel like it's really important actually to see them as separate practices that have incredible value in very, very different ways. And can you imagine not having had that experience? Because it sounds like that experience was absolutely pivotal to you.
mhm,
And what I'm very interested in, as you had the experience, a lot of people have an experience like that, go home and everything stays the same. Why did
mm,
it change for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, like a lot of people, you try something new, it feels really good, and then sticking to it, right? Having a practice is maybe a whole other story. And so one of the things that I did that I am super thankful I was had the wherewithal to think about it was I hired one of the Wim Hof instructors, Bart Schulteson. I hired him as a coach from that retreat. And so I just accountability. I said, if I know myself well enough in about 6 weeks, I'm not going to do this practice. Because what happens? You go on these retreats, you get on the plane and you're like, I don't need a pilot. I can fly this plane. I feel so good. Like, you're just on top of the world. And then you walk in the front door and your kids and your dog and your husband and everyone is like out of their gourd because you haven't been around. Like it's life happens and then you forget about the practice, right? And I didn't want that to happen. So I said, look, in about 6 weeks, I know that I'm not going to be doing my regular practice anymore. And I want you to help hold me accountable. And so for 6 months, we would just have a check-in call every 2 weeks. And from that, I learned about James Nestor,
Mm.
about other types of breathwork practice. For me, Wim Hof was the gateway drug to a million different types of breathing, right? It is just one way of breathing that I had discovered in a profound, it's perhaps my favorite way because I think it is the way that people can see right out of the gate how their body and their breath are connected. I've never met somebody that did 5 rounds of proper Wim Hof breathing and didn't have some type of physical experience because of that. Whatever that may look like, from a tingle to a buzz to whatever it may be, there's that mind body connection there that happens through that breathing practice that I think is profound. but it opened up the doors to me seeking and learning about a lot of different types of breathing. And so through that, I expanded my practice and tried a lot of different types of breathing on, and realized that, like, not every day do I want to wake up and do 5 rounds of Wim Hof breathing. Like, that's just, it became an intensity that I just didn't feel like I needed anymore. And so I started to play around with gentler, softer, more sort of feminine style breathwork practices that were getting me more into a kinder, more meditative state, in a way to start my day or end my day or get through my day than that. So now, and then I went and studied to be a breathwork facilitator, not necessarily because I wanted to be one, but because I was so curious to learn more. Signing up for a certification was a great way for me to, like, hold myself accountable and learn about different types of breath work, right? And so that's what I did. And that was a big part of my process too, of just continuing to learn and seek and try things on.
And how did you find the person that felt right for you for that next step?
For the coaching,
Yeah, to become a breathwork facilitator.
oh, same thing. I'm sure Google was listening. Well, at first I looked into becoming, yeah, at first I looked into becoming a Wim Hof instructor, but I didn't want to narrow myself into that one path. It works for a lot of people because like I said, it's so profound. But I was really curious. I'd read James's book and I was like, why do not more people know about this? And this was 2.5 years ago. I mean, now in the breath world, there's so many more options. There really were not that many options at the time.
Yeah.
And so I had found our breath collective in California, and these
Oh,
guys were,
magnificent. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's right. And they really were pioneering at the time, like, this idea of multidisciplinary breathwork practices. And
Yeah.
so it just spoke to me, and those guys are great. And it was an incredible program, and it helped, my journey in holding me accountable.
So at that point, I love this
Mhm.
accountability piece. This whole conversation is actually really inspiring me, because I can easily slip out of my own accountability as somebody that's doing all the teaching and the training and the facilitating, and then I go, oh, hang on, but what about me? You know,
Yeah.
and so at the point when you left and you'd got this accountability buddy, were you still in your kind of corporate world then, or had you already, as to use your words, kicked that to the curb?
Yeah, no, I kicked that to the curb. My husband actually, so we have a business and he sold it. So I was in a situation where, for the first time in my life, I didn't have to work. And it was what I thought was going to be a total gift, right? Like, something that I had always dreamed of, was not having to have the job. And I had spent, the better part of my adult life I'm really good at making money, but I never really loved my job. And so I thought, my God, this is incredible. I'm going to give myself permission to figure out, what is it that I really want to do, right? Well, in theory, that sounds amazing, right? Because this is what I wanted for so long. But then when you actually are faced with it, it's kind of terrifying. You're like, wait, now I really have to figure out, like, who I am and what I like. And if I can't even tell you if I'm hungry,
Mm,
how am I supposed to tell you how I want to spend the rest of my precious life on this planet living? Like, I
yeah.
don't know. And so it was and continues to be challenging. I mean, I'm always ebbing and flowing, and this season of life can be a real ass kicker for a lot of people. So, for sure, having some type of accountability for yourself is important. Now, the double-edged sword of this is, like, here we are talking about accountability and maybe it's like setting goals, whatever, but the whole point of self-awareness has nothing to do with that. That's still all in the monkey mind, right? Like, hiring a coach and, becoming certified, that's all sort of mind driven activity. It's like, connecting is really where the magic happens. For me, having some parameters and a path to figuring that out was helpful, but not everybody needs that.
I know I certainly did, and even for me, it's an ongoing process of reinvention, because it's like the older I get, maybe there's some more freedoms that come in. Again, we spoke at the beginning, my children are grown up, they've left home, I live on
Hmm.
my own time according to my own schedules, and I get to dictate that. And within that huge range of freedom, as you say, sometimes that can be kind of like, oh, this is a bit woolly, where am I going next? And I've had to really identify what my core values are, like
Mm.
what's important to me in this world, and how can I be in service to that? And the more I look at how I can be in service to those values and couple that with what I get to see other people struggling with, because there are some benefits of getting older and wiser, hopefully, as well,
Mm.
that it's like, one, I don't stress so much about the things that I think actually they're part of the huge range of the spectrum of human experience. So, in my breath work, and I'm sure it's the same for you now in your work, typically when people start to express what's in there, say it's an emotional trauma, then a car crash kind of physical trauma, which
Mhm.
obviously creates emotional trauma as well, but say it starts in the emotional center with how they believe themselves to be, how they show up in the world, maybe what they've been told, where they've been injured, where they've been wounded, where they've shut down, and they start to open up through some of these practices, but more through being met in presence and community, then
Mhm.
suddenly they begin to realize their own potential and they make course adjustments like, oh, I don't have to keep living that way, or I don't have to
Mm.
keep on staying in this horrible relationship or this awful job. And the things that bring resignation for people start to like shift a little bit,
Mhm.
and I
Yeah,
feel
I
that's where the magic
agree.
is.
Yeah, I agree. I think, self-awareness is a pretty profound journey, right? And there, I think, was overall, like if I were to simplify it, I would say I have a knowing now within me that everything's going to be okay.
Mm,
It doesn't matter if I go left or I go right or I go forward or I go backwards. Everything's going to be okay. And I'm subsequently I'm able to go with the flow
mm,
a lot better. And I think more now than ever before, this world that we live in where everyone just shows the best version of themselves all the time,
mm,
it's, I think, creating a bigger gap between who we think we are and who we really are because we're pretending to be people that we're just not. And
absolutely.
everybody has their shit, right? We
Yeah.
have our personal lives, we have our private lives, we have our secret lives,
Yeah.
right? Like nobody leaves this planet unscathed, right? Everyone has really, really bad things that happen to them. It's just, and nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
And so the and which I think is crazy. I think more people need to talk about like what's really going on in their life, how they people really, really, really feel. Because if everybody understood that everybody was going through something or has been through something, and we were aware of that, the world would be a much more forgiving
Mm,
place to move through, right? So I think that you know having confidence in knowing that this path, this life is big and bold and beautiful and exactly how it was supposed to be, and I'm living it is the best gift I could have given to myself.
mm. And you mentioned earlier, about how you'd won the lottery with your children, but I
Mm.
suspect that you contributed to those lottery tickets. Because it's like,
Well,
um,
being a mom has definitely been best my best job thus far, for sure, for sure.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I relate, I
yeah.
relate. So I want to come back again to this piece about women in this work, and
Mm.
also move towards where you're going with your work. But um, I look at social media, I look at all these,
Mm.
ideal versions of everybody. I get so fed up. The latest thing that's going around on Facebook and Instagram are these little strips that you put on your eyelids that lift your eyelids so that you're suddenly like you look 10 years younger again. And I'm like going, when did we get so afraid of aging? When did we get
Mm.
so afraid of being less beautiful, particularly for women? For men, it might be a
Mm.
whole different kind of a set of things that they're working with. But let's stay with women for a moment. And I feel that that's also part of this illusion that needs taking apart.
Mhm.
So in your work, do you find that is your focus mainly towards women now, or is it gender neutral? Like what's your ideal audience and who do you find migrating to you the most?
It's an interesting question. And again, like, I don't necessarily believe everything that I see online because of the algorithms and what's been put in front of me. But in general, it seems like you're right. Like this awareness, health, and wellness space is predominantly driven by women, right? Go to any, you know, flow yoga class in the United States, it's probably mostly women in the room. But Wim Hof is predominantly male. I mean, when I actually ended up going to Poland, which is another aside that I would just say for people is if you are on a path, like continuing to go on retreats, expeditions, adventures, I think is a big part of the process. So I went to Poland afterwards and hiked the mountain, in my underwear with, I think there were just about 100 people there and there were only 6 women. So it was a
What?
sea of testosterone.
Wow.
uh yeah, yeah, so that in and of itself was a really challenging experience to be in a room with in a good way. I learned a lot about myself. I mean, I'm probably one of the most masculine feminine women you'll meet, so that, like, being in that room was perfectly fine for me. But it seems like cold exposure in particular, which I'm a huge fan of. I do it on a regular basis. I have a cold plunge in my backyard. I was in there this morning. Like, it's part of my morning routine or my daily routine. It seems to be predominantly driven by men. And this idea of, like, the longer the better. And it's this, like, people are jumping in and going for sprints afterwards. And it's this, like, super intense thing. And for me, I have a fountain and a Buddha and plants, and it's like quiet and nature, and it's outside and it's peaceful and it's calm, and there's no timer. There's no, like, the whole point is to get out of your mind and into your body and slow down and connect and shut up, right? And so it's this I watch this stuff unravel online and I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, if that works for you, great. But there's this whole other way of practicing that I think a lot of people would be turned off by because they don't realize that there's this other component to it. And then it's the same thing for the breath work, right? I mean, you can go to a breathwork class where everyone's like, the intent is to get trauma out and to release emotion. And from some people just don't want to do that. And and they need to, there needs to be space for people that just want to feel better and breathe.
Yeah.
And right. And so the narrative is confusing at times, right? But I am appreciative of the fact that Wim Hof has bringing a lot of male energy to the room because it is important. And in Spain, when you're laying outside on this mountaintop breathing, and the 7-foot German guy is crying like a 5-year-old about his parents, it's profound. It's permission for people to go there. And we just don't live in a world where we give people permission to do that very often. So we say, like, the breath work is how to live your life, and the cold exposure is how to survive.
Mm.
And my whole life, I mean, I'm a great survivor. Like, you have a problem, like, my girlfriends have a problem, like, I'm the person that you call. Like, I can handle a disproportionate amount of crap, right? Like, that's probably why cold exposure is not as hard for me as it is for some other people. Like, I mean, it's hard, but there's people that are terrified
Yeah.
of suffering,
Mhm.
right? I'm okay with that. The breath work is the part that's hard for me.
Right.
It's to be alone and quiet and still with myself,
Mm.
and really going there is the part that is the hardest. And so it's the part that I still struggle with to this day. If and sometimes ends up being the last thing on my list to get done, and that's okay. That's okay.
I don't
Like,
know what you're talking
right?
about. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's okay because I think, we know when we've tripped into that space of I'm ignoring myself. I'm not listening to my body now. I'm not listening to my soul, my spirit, my heart,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, coming through. Um, and my mom brought me up saying, that little voice will just get louder and louder and you won't be able to ignore it. It's this voice of your conscience and this voice of your awareness. It was such great advice.
Yeah.
So what are you doing now in terms of how you've consolidated all this? Because this was during COVID, so that's a huge shift for you, and the world
Yeah.
has shifted as well. So where are
Yeah.
you taking all of this now?
Well, in the last 2.5 years, I mean, that one trip really started a lot of other trips and journeys and expeditions. And I did a beautiful Mela meditation expedition in or retreat in California. And then I went to Poland. And then after reading James's book, I saw that he was hosting a retreat. So I went on his first retreat in Costa Rica, and he and I hit it off. And the business side of me was like, there's something here. And so I kind of just kept that in the back of my mind. And then I went to Poland and I did that retreat. And then I was invited to do an expedition in Norway where I paddle boarded the fjords and camped for a week, which was like crack cocaine of nature. It was the most incredible experience I've had. And from that, met this amazing group of women from Iceland who have invited me on a documentary, like filming expedition this summer in Iceland for 2 weeks. So I'll be backpacking. So I've just been saying yes, yes, yes. I just ordered a Mercedes Sprinter van that I'm having converted to a camper with outside van in Portland, Oregon. And I'm picking that up the end of this month. And I'm going to get in it and just go and see what happens. Could be a disaster. I don't know. So I've been really saying yes to almost everything. And through that, have realized that there are a couple of common themes in this journey that have been really magical for me. And I see really make a huge difference for other people. And now I'm really have honed in on helping people in more profound ways. So I reached out to James and just said, hey, I've done a lot of these retreats. What you're doing is different than what I've experienced with anybody else. I'd love the opportunity to work with you and maybe try to hone this in and finesse it a little bit better and make it better. And so we turned what was a 30-person retreat into a 100-person retreat. And we're doing those all over the world. We've got 2 scheduled in Costa Rica, and then another one happening in Stockholm that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, I want to
Yeah,
come.
yes, yes, for all of the people in Europe that are wanting to get someplace closer by, we're gonna hopefully check that box for you. And so helping sort of, thought-provoking leaders around the world curate content for retreats that helps people is really something that fires me up. And getting outside and pushing your body and doing interesting things in the outdoors is also something that really fires me up. So I'm, focused on encouraging more people to get outside. Travel alone, I think, is a really, really, really important thing. If I look back on this process, showing up somewhere not with your girlfriend, not with your spouse or your partner, but just whoever it is you are in that moment and not how somebody else knows you
Yeah.
is a really, really, really beautiful thing. And I don't think enough people do it. And so I want to, basically help people find the thing that's going to be their one trip to pivot them or open them up to new experiences and knowings of themselves.
You need to come with a disclaimer then.
A big asterisk.
Yeah. Well, I just did an online training with Robin Delzen, who teaches Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent work, and that was really profound, just in learning about the fundamentals of consent, because I thought, God, I've been working in sexual freedom activism for 2 decades, but and I thought I knew a lot about what consent meant, but actually, I'm a fledgling in that nest, when it comes to the subtleties of how we communicate. And by the end of the course, I was like, I have a question. Do all of you live by this now? Is this your bottom line in conscious negotiation of your domains and your boundaries and you speaking authentically? And they said, oh, absolutely, 100%. And they said, actually, we should preface this course with warning this will change your life. Because I was like, oh shit. There are some things that it has made really clear already that are not working in my life and that I've just been going along with, because most of us sit in that comfort zone you're talking about, whether it's experiences, whether it's travel, whether it's work, whatever it is. And so we never know what's possible.
That's right.
And I'm
That's
looking
right.
at you now and I'm going, well, there's that woman who was like, kind of feeling fed up, not sleeping, refilling the recycling with wine bottles every night. I'm guessing that's not
Mhm.
you now.
No, mm-mm. No, and actually from a science standpoint, I know you'll love this. So when I wasn't feeling good before I went to Spain, I had my annual with my gynecologist, and they ran all my blood work, and sure enough, I had like no testosterone, very little estrogen, and I checked every single box that basically said I was a candidate for hormone replacement therapy, and in a very Western medicine way, they basically said, the best way to feel better is to do these testosterone pellets. And so I said, okay, I want to feel better. And all I need are 2 pellets put in my ass. Sounds great. Let's do it. And so off I went to the doctor, uh, and no other discussion, right? No other discussion about, I don't know, my diet, nothing. Just like, let's do this. And so I remember when she was putting 2 of them in my butt, I thought, if these don't work, can I come back and take? And she's like, no, once they're in, like they're in, they got to dissolve. They'll dissolve, and over time they'll, you know, sort itself out. Well, about 3 or 4 days later, I'm driving down the road and somebody cuts me off, and I just about put my fist through the windshield. I was out of my gourd. Like literally, my husband came home from work one day and I was holding a knife in the kitchen and I was like, cut them out. Just take them out, please. And he was like, babe, like step away from the knife. And I called my doctor, went back in, and I had my blood work done, and my testosterone was through the roof. Like I don't even remember what the number was, but it was way out of whack. And they told me that I just hold on, wait 2 weeks. It started to come down. I went back 2 weeks later. They retested me. Well, the testosterone was exactly where they wanted it to be, but my estrogen had gone absolutely haywire. And so then I was just this crying train wreck. So this is all happening as my husband and I are sitting on the porch. This is why he bought the ticket, right? He's like, my wife was holding a knife in the kitchen. I gotta get her the hell out of here, right? So the day before I left for Spain, I had the bandwidth to go back to the lab, and I had them pull my hormones again. And then I went to Spain, and the day after I came back, I went back to the lab and I had my numbers pulled again. And it was profound, the difference. What 1 week of cold exposure and deep breathing and being outside and plugging into people and laughing and just being free and open and full of love did for the science and the hormones of my body. And if
Right.
I look now between from the first time I went to the doctor until now, I have a naturopath that I work with. She's incredible, Dr. Zinkoff, and she just pulled my numbers recently. And since then, my testosterone has tripled, my progesterone is quadrupled, and my estrogen is almost quadrupled too. And I've done nothing other than like the protocols of just good health and wellness, cold exposure, regular breathing, much better nutrition, just better sleep, taking care of myself, all the things. And let me preface by saying, this is just my story. Hormone replacement therapy works for a ton of women, but the path, and I may be on it in some capacity. I'm a pro feel good person. But was unfortunate in my experience was that the discussion was never like, let's take a closer look of what's going on. Let's look at your gut. Let's look at your, your lifestyle, all the other things. It was, let's put 2 pellets in your ass and see what happens. It was not a good experience. It was not a good experience.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, there's honestly, obviously, we have to draw to a close in a moment, and I feel there's
Mm,
more conversation in here because I just think it's so important, having like I ran juice bars in clean food cafes for 20 years before I came to Breathwork. And because I was clearing out my own stuff and clearing my own story in this process of like, that seems to work. I'm feeling better. Oh, and then because I'm entrepreneurial, let me go and do that. I want to make everybody a convert, Now I'm doing that with the breath and wellness, but also like you, I haven't followed a path of HRT or anything like that yet. I mean, I'm 12 years older than you, no, 13 years older than you. And I feel great. I feel better. Yes, there are things in my body that creak and ache, and it's harder to get up off a low sofa and stuff like that than it once was. And not in some ways, like retrospectively. In fact, when I was at Patrick McEwen's Oxygen Advantage training in Galway last week, he came to this one bit, this might make you smile, and we were giving these exercises, and he said, so when we come to the breath retention, I don't recommend that you do this with anybody over 60. And my hand shot up and I went, excuse me? That's nonsense. Like, it isn't just because you're over 60 that you can't do a breath
Yeah.
retention or that you can't do the jogging or the running. I'm fitter than people half my age. And he was
Yes.
like, okay, I stand corrected. Anybody except Steph. And then he said, but jokingly, yes, take it on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
So I think this concept of health and wellness is something that is massively overlooked. And even unfortunately, you found your gateway through watching Goop. That series got slated as being like, oh, Gwyneth Paltrow's woo-woo show. And yet people found intimacy and tantra and ice baths and breath work and nutrition information. And it's like, let's stop with all of the judgment and actually go, okay, thank you for giving me the exposure. I'm going to see what works. Let my
Hmm.
body be the.
Decide. Hmm. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing where it takes you. I look forward to seeing where your retreats grow with James and your own work. Where can people find you, Bradlee?
Yeah, I have a website that I just launched. It's bradleeroffers.com. We'll put the link on the website here. And yeah, you can reach out to me there. I've got a regular newsletter that I'm starting and a blog, and we'll be out and about on my van talking about that. So there should be some good stories for sure, meeting people along the way. And yeah, I'm just so thankful that we got to connect and our paths crossed. And another reason why, getting out in the world and meeting people can bring you, incredible opportunities and more people in your life. It's very rare that I get to go somewhere where I don't know somebody that I've met from some retreat or know somebody who knows somebody. And it's a beautiful network of people. And I'm super
Mm,
thankful that we got to connect.
yeah, likewise. It is the human mycelium network, it's the thing that brings us together as human beings.
Yeah.
And if you had one piece of wisdom or guidance or a
Mm.
prompt that you wanted to share with people who were feeling the way that you were feeling, what would it be?
Yeah, think about the thing that you don't want to do, and that's probably the thing that you should lean into lean into the most, right? Do something hard.
Yeah.
It's in that grit, that toughness, that challenge, that I think real self-awareness comes to the surface. So when you're reluctant, lean into that.
And yeah, and be willing to feel that feeling and feel that fear
Mhm.
because on the other side of it, it's a cliche, but it's probably a cliche for a reason. So
Yeah, yeah,
thank
that's right.
you so
Thank you,
much
Steph.
for your
Yeah,
time.
yeah, it was
And to,
great to meet you. Thank you.
yeah, to everybody who's listening or watching, depending which version of this you've chosen, all of the links where you can find Bradlee will be posted underneath the show. And Bradlee, I'll let you know when this goes live and you can share
Okay,
it. Thank you
great.
so much.
Thank you, Steph.